So, welcome, Manuel, and a thank you for agreeing for this interview and giving us the opportunity to bring to light the workings of Project Manaia and celebrating the World Environment Day with us. Now, since we have so much to talk about and so little time, we have curated certain questions that would help us navigate this interview easily. So, if it's okay, can I start with my first question?
Of course, go ahead.
Oh, perfect. So, Manuel, what do you think? Has there been enough conversation about the importance of protecting the environment?
In terms of the conversation, I think it's been very much an uphill run. So there's more and more conversation about the environmental issues. However, since many people these days, especially the younger generation, is getting, I'd say, 90% of their news off social media, it really very much depends on which sort of channels you follow. So if you are not in touch with any environmental organizations or causes for that matter, chances are you'll never hear anything about it. But I still feel like in mainstream media, newspaper, TV stations, there's a lot of conversation going on. But the big issue I see at this point is that the conversation is going in a not perfect direction. As in, yes, we talk about we need to save the whales, we need to save the environment, we need to save, I don't know, the rainforest, we need to save all sorts of environments. But really the conversation should be about how it's directly affecting us. Because if we lose all those habitats, ultimately we lose a planet that we are able to live on. So really we're not trying to save anyone else, we're just trying to save ourselves. And that, I think in the heads of most people, that conversation would be a very different one, because it's directly affecting us.
Yes, absolutely. And considering the fact that it is very concentrated in one part, and then it also varies from, like you talked about the habitat and the ecosystem. It's really different from one place to another. So I believe even the steps that we as individuals take to protect the environment can vary. So if you would like to sum it up and explain how can we do our part in helping and protecting the environment and the ecosystem around us.
I think the beautiful thing really is that everyone can do something, and it can start with tiny little steps in the right direction. Consider your consumption. So consider the things you eat, the things you drink, consider where they come from, and think about how, for example, if you like to eat hot dogs, where does the meat come from? How did that animal grow up? What sort of a life did it have? Is it really necessary to eat it? How much resources went into actually growing that thing? And the same is also true for everything we own. Do I really need the newest cell phone? Do I need a fancy new car? Can I not do with a second-hand version or refurbed electronic device? So all those things really add up to a lot. And ultimately, the production is really one of the major things, because producing a cell phone is an enormous footprint in comparison. While you could easily get a second-hand one from somebody who buys a new one every year anyways, and it will still be fine for a couple of years to come. Same is true for cars. It really always depends on what cause you want to be fighting for. If you want to tackle, for example, plastic, then obviously you want to go for glass bottles. You want to stay away from plastic as much as you possibly can. You want to look for toilet paper that's actually wrapped in paper and not in plastic. But if your conversation is about a CO2 footprint, then a plastic bottle is actually much better than a glass bottle, because the energy it takes to clean a glass bottle is much more than it takes to produce a plastic bottle. So it really depends on, it's sort of a pick your battle kind of loop. And ultimately, every step in a good direction is a step in the right direction. So it doesn't matter if you reduce your consumption, if you choose a more, well, let's say CO2 friendly direction for all your consumption. It could be change of your diet, it could be using public transport, it could be stepping away from your own vehicle. It could be many things, and it can also be things that don't necessarily change your habits, but it could be something very hands-on. So go to a beach, clean up some trash. Find a local NGO that works on a cause that you're really passionate about. And depending on where you are, that might be a very, very different cause. But if it's something you're passionate about, then that's the one to go for. Find a small NGO that's working on exactly the topic you are interested in and try to support them in every way possible. And that can be with your know-how, that can be with your time, with your efforts, or it can be financially, because most small NGOs are definitely struggling with the funding. And that's just a handful of things that everyone can do right up the top of my head.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these points, because some of the things were not very common that you talked about, especially the comparison between a plastic bottle and a glass bottle. So, and also between a toilet paper and a normal plastic bag, because even toilet paper comes from the natural resources. So, Manuel, how has Project Manaia been a part of this and a part of trying to protect and save the environment?
So what we are trying to do really is, for one, a lot of documentation work, but also we are looking for working solutions for existing issues. So where we are based in the Mediterranean Sea, one of the big issues as of right now is the massive habitat loss. So one of the key ecosystems here is Posidonia oceanica, which is a seagrass ultimately, and it is the home and habitat for about 1/3 of all the animals that live in the Mediterranean Sea. However, in the last 5 to 7 years, we lost massive habitats. So in the Northern Adriatic Sea, for example, all the seagrass is gone, and it happened in a handful of years, which on the flip side also means that over the course of the next handful of years, we will lose at least 1/3 of the species that are directly linked to the seagrass. And once those are gone, we will lose everything else, which ultimately leads to probably fairly much complete collapse of the ecosystems in the area. So what we are doing now is to try motivate lots of different entities. So that's NGOs, that's dive centers, that's individuals, to help us to basically replant seagrass. So there's lots of seeds right now, and usually they have a survival rate below 5%. But if you actually collect the seeds and you put them somewhere on the ground where they have a good shot of growing, the survival rate goes up to 90% right away. So that is one thing that we try to promote right now, and very few people are actually aware of the fact that seagrass has seeds, or flowers for that matter. But we also do beach cleanups, we do underwater cleanups, again, collaborating with dive centers, and we actually have a small recycling workshop on the boat right now. So the trash that we collect on the beach, we don't just bring it to a dumpster. Parts of it we can actually recycle on board, and we can make new useful pieces out of it, which is quite a nice showcase more than anything, because the main question that always comes up after cleaning up a mess is, okay, what are we doing with it now? And in many places, the sad truth is that all you can do is bring it to a dumpster and hope that it gets recycled somewhere, which often is unfortunately not the case. So those are just two of the big things we're doing. And then there's a lot of, well, really documenting work, because there's a major shift in the inhabitants of the Mediterranean. So we have lots of new species coming in from the Red Sea, also from the Atlantic Ocean. And those are basically pushing the locals out of their niches, which means that from year to year, traveling the same route, we can see very different animals. So some just find their niche and they settle and they become more and more, and you can watch it happening basically, while others just vanish and ultimately will go extinct in the area. And as of right now, there's very few NGOs or even governments that are actually documenting this happening. So we're trying to get a handle of what is happening, how quick it's happening, and then ultimately, obviously, we're trying to find solutions to avoid the loss of biodiversity in the area.
So like you mentioned, in a very short span, a lot has changed, especially when it comes to seagrasses and the ecosystem on the surface and beneath the water, which was very shocking, and I did not know of this because the most that we hear is about the glaciers that are melting down, and this is the only major thing, unfortunately, that we know of. So what do you think has been the course of the biodiversity and the actions that we are taking, considering like 10 years ago or a couple of years ago? So has it improved considering the amount of awareness that we all have, or has it been declining?
I like to think that the awareness is getting better. So there's at the least there's more people who are aware of the issues. That's not to say that more people are working against these issues. I mean, the ultimate cause of much of this is the climate is changing, and there's just no denying it, even though there's plenty of people out there who still do. But for example, right now it's June, and the water here is 25 degrees right now. And talking to the locals, the water at this time of the year should be around 19, 20 degrees. So it is 5 degrees warmer than it used to be over the last, say, 50 years or however long we have been recording the data. So this is an incredible change. So that obviously also shifts all the reproductive phases of lots of the animals, lots of the plants. And this does become an issue. And I mean, you have coral reefs that die off because the water is more than 30 degrees. In the Mediterranean, we don't have coral reefs because the water is too cold. And yet we have one reef-building coral, which grows reefs about this size, so tiny. And already now we can see bleached coral in the Mediterranean, and it's early in the year. So it will only get hotter, and it's incredible really to watch this in real time. So in a way, we are very fortunate to witness this, and it's going to be incredibly exciting to see what happens the next couple of years. But it's also very horrifying to know that we might be here to see entire ecosystems collapse. And as of right now, chances are this will happen in our lifetime. And while people are aware that things are moving in a not good direction, I mean, the decision makers are just so incredibly slow making the decisions. And while awareness is a great thing, what we really need is action. So we can talk about all the issues all we want, and people can discuss about it and be aware of it as much as they want. But if nobody changes their behavior, if nobody starts working on the issues and trying to find a working solution for it, knowing about the issue is not going to help it. So the awareness is great, and it's still lacking in many places. So even here in Italy, in Croatia, in Greece, talking to the locals, they are very much not aware of the importance of seagrass. They know it's there and it's kind of annoying because the anchor doesn't hold. You keep pulling it out in your fishing nets, but that's about the extent of it. Most of them are even not happy about the idea of snorkeling on top of it because it looks kind of spooky. But truth is, if we lose it, we lose a lot more. And once we lose enough species, enough habitat, ultimately fisheries will collapse and entire ecosystems will go down the drain. And this is the part of the awareness that I think is missing. Because if we lose the things that we are trying, or that some people are trying to protect, ultimately we lose our livelihood. And that is our food, that is our tourism, that is the clarity of the water, which attracts the tourists, that is the diversity, which keeps the whole Mediterranean healthy. And if that is gone, we're looking at bathing in a dirty soup in 20, 30 years down the road. And I think that's the link that has to be created in people's minds. It's not the seagrass we're trying to protect. It's trying to keep a sea alive to an extent that we can keep enjoying it. And people love going for a swim in the sea. They love going diving. They love sailing in crystal clear waters. But what it takes to keep that is us doing something right now. And I think that's an important conversation to be had.
That was literally very scary to hear about, because like you said, all of these changes will happen in our lifespan and we will be witnessing it firsthand. And the worst part is we are also responsible in a way to not stop it. So about all the awareness that you talked about, even there are people who are aware of it and also there are people who are not aware of it. So also considering the fact that the way the governments have been approaching this issue, do you think is it enough? When it comes to the way governments are approaching it and the governmental policies, and also the amount of awareness that the locals have about their own ecosystem. So do you think is it enough?
No, we're not there yet. So even though the awareness is getting better, I think one of the major steps would be the education system. So really in schools locally tell the people what it is they have. I mean, you can go anywhere in the world where, if you talk to divers, for example, they love going to the Maldives, they love going to the Red Sea because there's beautiful coral and it's amazing to dive. It's absolutely stunning underwater. But if you talk to the locals in Egypt, for example, right next to the Red Sea, unless they are diving instructors working there, they won't have any idea what's underneath the water. And the same is true for the locals in the Maldives. People come diving to the Mediterranean Sea. People enjoy diving through seagrass. Talk to the locals. For them, it's just this dark green stuff down there. So I think a major shift has to happen in the education system so that people are really aware of the incredibly valuable resource they have right there in front of the doorsteps, and why it is important and why it is worth protecting. That's absolutely key. And unfortunately, we can't wait for governments to make the decisions, because the truth is governments are slow. Just like every big apparatus, it takes ages for them to make any decisions. And even if decisions are made, I mean, looking around now, the place where we are anchored right now is actually right in between two marine protected areas. So there's one to the north, one to the south of us. So in theory, you're not allowed to anchor here at all. In the protected area that is. In between the stripe where we are is fine. But over the weekend, there was hundreds of boats anchored all over the place, and they ripped out, I can't even tell you how much seagrass just last weekend. Each anchor pulled out a big bundle of Posidonia. And it is, in theory, a protected area. In reality, nobody cares. And that's the other big thing. So even if you manage to get your government to actually start stepping up and declaring a protected area, for example, or a national park, or change regulations that something is legal to do, somebody has to reinforce it. Somebody has to be there and actually check up on it. And that could be, for example, fishermen, because ultimately they will be running out of business as things are going right now. Why not pay them a little bit to just go around and check on people and check where they're anchoring and see if they are doing things legally or not? And Posidonia oceanica, this exact same seagrass, it is in reality a protected species. So in theory, you're not allowed to touch it. You're not allowed to anchor on it. You're not allowed to have your anchoring chain going over it. And yet, the only country where I ever saw anyone checking on it was Spain. But that's just one out of more than 20 countries around the Mediterranean Sea. And everywhere else, nobody seems to care at all. And that's, I suspect, mostly because of a lack of education. Once people understand the importance of any key habitat, I mean, in our case, yes, it's seagrass, but it might as well be coral in the tropics. It might be rainforests. It might be whichever habitat you choose. There is a very important reason for pretty much any environment anywhere on this planet to exist. And every one of them has a major key role. But people need to understand what it is and why we need it and why it's incredibly important to keep it alive. And that can only happen with good education, and ideally for the locals who are in the area. Because ultimately, all that we are right now is a random stranger from a foreign country who's sitting here and telling the locals to do something, even though it's all theirs. And that's why I think you have to get the locals on your side. And for that to happen, they have to understand exactly what's happening and why it is important for them to take care of their property, so to speak.
That was very true and very sad to hear about at the same time, because if you do not know what's happening in your own home, I don't think anybody can help you out. And like you rightly said, education is very important, be it through any social media platform, or it can also be through schools, if I'm not wrong. So is there a way where an outsider can help your non-profit so that it really helps, it indirectly helps the environment and the work that you've been doing?
To help us out, there's lots of ways, in fact. So for one, we invite people to come on the boat and actually join our work hands-on and really be part of the process of everything we do. But also, right now we are a small NGO, so there's only a handful of people working on the whole thing. And we this year actually reached the limit where there's so many good projects that wanted to join us and wanted to do work with us, and we are simply out of space. So the boat is not big enough to host all the projects. So one of our big plans for the next winter is to upgrade the boat and therefore allow more people to join us on board, and so that we can get more done in the next years. So if somebody wants to give away a bigger sailboat, for example, that would be amazing. But also we do need help with different things, that being outreach, that being grant writing. So there's many talents that we are seeking that we are simply not great in. So if somebody is good in anything, really, it can be outreach, social media marketing. Grant writing is a big one as of right now. but also finding sponsors for future projects. I mean, ultimately, as I said, small NGOs are usually always struggling with the funding. So also donations always welcome for any small NGO. I'm sure that's not just us. But yeah, time and expertise is, I think, one of the main things that everyone can easily offer to various NGOs, and that's including ourselves.
Thank you so much, Manuel, because listening to you and listening to the conditions that the Mediterranean Sea and the areas around it is facing, I really felt that I could do something so that not only that area but also the world can change in a small bit way. And by giving this answer, you really helped me, and also the viewers that would be listening and viewing this on what small thing they can do to help everybody around us. So with this question, we have come to the end of the interview, and thank you so much for shedding light on something which was not very common to hear about, and helping us understand small habits that we can choose or discard that would affect the environment in such a big way. So if there's anything that you would like to ask me before I hit the end button.
Still, I think all clear from my end. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope we meet again sometime, either on the water or on Zoom.